Just concluded a very thrilling game of No Peace Without Honor, the Dutch War, 1672 to 1678, here on my first day off of my extended Christmas break. And I was very excited for this. First of all, I played it with a gaming friend of mine who I haven't seen in a very long time, and it's the first time he's come over and played games again with me for quite a while. And he'd never played this system. And as you know, if you've been watching my channel, I really like a pragmatic war, and I think this system is fantastic. And so he and I decided we were going to bust out the first chronologically, at least for now, and the newest game in the system, and that was No Peace Without Honor. So he took the role of the French Bourbon, and I took the role of the Dutch and Dutch allied powers, and we just wrapped it up. So the game runs from 1672 up to 1679, but as you can see, we actually finished the game in 1677, and at the very end of 1677. And the reason that happened was this track here, this war weariness track. So you can see that the war weariness for both sides was up sort of pretty high midway. The combined war weariness here moves this marker, and when this marker gets to the end, there's an event that triggers that essentially ends the game. And because of how much combat and successful sieging that he did as the Bourbon player, we managed to end the game in 1677. It was very fun. The Dutch have a very difficult job in this game to protect Amsterdam. Basically, the game begins with 2 or 3 extremely formidable French armies in this sector of the map, besieging all avenues into Amsterdam. The Dutch do have a couple of tools at their disposal. One, and the sort of cool thing about this game, are the fortified lines, which, as you can see, the Dutch built a fortified line here in Naarden. These provide extremely punitive die roll penalties in combat, when you move into a space and have battle there, the attacker is at a severe disadvantage. Now, there's ways to sort of bypass these fortified lines with a die roll, but if you don't get them, then it can be punitive. They're also worth victory points if you destroy them. And so the Dutch managed to kind of fortify this line around Naarden and Lobith and prevent the French from moving into Amsterdam. On the final turn, we did have Noailles here with his army. They had taken Bergen. The French had taken Bergen in 1676, and they moved into Amsterdam in 1677. And then Prince William, who had his army stationed here in Naarden, moved in, and there was a huge battle. And even though he was outnumbered, Prince William won, forced the French back, and was able to protect the auto victory for the French. The French are extremely formidable in this game. They basically start the game with all their units on the map, so they don't really get reinforcements, but they are extremely powerful. They have really good leaders. You can see Catinat here is besieging Ostend from the Spanish. And the Dutch start kind of alone. They really only have one ally, and that's the Brandenburgers, who don't really have a large army and who are kind of fickle because they're off fighting Sweden for some time. So they're not very reliable. And then as the game goes along, you start to get more powers joining the Dutch side. So the Holy Roman Empire and Bavaria, or in Munich, Bavaria end up joining. You can see here's Max Emanuel with an army. He is besieging Koblenz, which is under French control. Never did manage to take it. I was very close. I was one die roll away from doing it before the game ended. That would have been extremely useful for me to cut French supply. French supply through here is very tenuous, and one of the big puzzles of this game is how do you, as the Dutch allied player, threaten the supply lines for the French forward forces so they can't besiege your vulnerable Dutch areas? And obviously, having to contest the Spanish Netherlands, and Spain starts the game neutral. So the French don't necessarily want to go in here and attack, although as we finish the game, we realize that the Spanish don't have a lot of force. So attacking them early to take some of these key choke point locations and valuable spaces might be worth it. And then some other Dutch allies come in. England, which didn't play a huge role in this game, switches from Bourbon allied to independent, and then the British eventually come in on the side of the Dutch, but they don't have very many units, as you can see, just a couple and a very crappy leader. Really, a lot of the Dutch allied forces, the British, the Spanish, even the Portuguese, when they come in, really what they're going to be used for is, depending on who has control of the different sea zones in the game, probably to land a force in some of these vulnerable Dunkirk, Brest, possibly Toulon down here, port spaces controlled by the French. You've also got Savoy. In this game, they came in on the side of the French, but there is a chance that that they can come in on the side of the Dutch as well, which is kind of interesting. Sort of mid to late game, the Savoy troops come in on one side or another. And then, there's a lot of open space down in the south if the French want to marshal an army and move down there. Really very few Spanish soldiers. So it's unlike Pragmatic War, which kind of has like hotspots popping up all over the map. This game is really focused in and around the Netherlands and sort of the slog through a lot of these fortified spaces and the defense that a desperate defense that the Dutch have to put up to stop the French from moving in. The Dutch can actually flood by opening the dikes. They can flood Naarden and Amsterdam, and that provides some penalties for besieging in those spaces and lowers the stacking limit for the French. So as the French start to close in, the Dutch can kind of like pull the plug on the drain and mess them up, which is kind of cool. I will say that the game ended, by the way, with a French minor victory. So we were at 6 victory points. This right here is the cutoff. So had I been able to conquer Koblenz, that wouldn't have been enough. Had I not lost Bergen up here, I would have won the game. So it was really tight, really came down to the wire. But the French did have a very horrible first turn. They lost on the first turn. I was expecting them to come in, steam through Lobith, and take either Naarden or Groningen. I was all ready to flood the Netherlands on turn 1, but the French got really, really bad rolls. They flubbed this first battle against some German troops, some German mercenaries, subsidy forces here in Lobith behind a fortified line, and they were repulsed. And in that battle, they actually lost their best leader, Turenne. So he wasn't killed with a cannonball later in the war. He was actually killed in the very first engagement of the war. No, that's Condé. Here he is right here. No, that's the Duke of Luxembourg. Oh, Duke of Luxembourg, the best French leader. He was in the game half a turn before he also died. The French made several assaults in the opening couple of turns, and it resulted in Turenne and Luxembourg dying in both of those battles. It was incredible. So I think the Dutch pretty much escaped with the best they could have hoped for, given the French leadership advantage, by killing 2 of the best commanders like within the first year or 2 of the war. It was pretty epic. And they managed to repulse the French for most of the game. As we got down to the end, the French started to get better positioning, and their forces are just so large, it's really hard to stand against them. But it was a lot of fun. It's a lot more static of a game than Pragmatic War. So if you're more into sort of like the puzzle of maneuver or 50-50 combats over large areas, maybe a Pragmatic War would be better for you. But this is a really interesting period of history that doesn't get a lot of coverage, and I really enjoyed it. I think I like Pragmatic War better, but I would want to play this again. In fact, we finished and I wanted to play it again immediately. You can see Charles here. He came in sort of mid-game, and he put the pressure on the French rear. He ended up taking Strasbourg. It took him 2 years. Unfortunately, I should have had it in the first year, which would have severely changed the game because I would have been able to march to Nevers and Clermont pretty easily with him to score those points. But eventually he did take it, and that did give me some points at the end. And that's actually what triggered the end game, was the war weariness from taking Strasbourg from the French. So this is a much more static game, as I was saying. So if you are more into like more wide open games, Pragmatic War would be better. But I think the one advantage that this one has, and I think that is really cool, is that based on the end state of how you finish this, you can actually go directly into 9 years, which starts in 1688. And there's a little brief interphase you play. Based on how this ends, you make a die roll to see how the war between this one and the War of the Grand Alliance starts. And it changes the setup for 9 years War of the Grand Alliance. And the same is true then of 9 years and No Peace Without Spain. So you could actually play a full 3-game grand campaign starting in 1672. And going all the way to the end of the War of Spanish Succession, back to back to back, where each game determines how the next game starts, which I think is so rad. And we decided to take a picture of the way this ended, and when we game again, we might play 9 years and play with the sort of campaign rules that goes from one game to another, because we both really enjoyed it. Once again, I think this system is super fantastic. As far as CDGs goes, I don't know that I've had more fun with a CDG this year than this one. And the spoiler that I'll give you for my end of year best games video that I'm going to do at the beginning of January is that this system will appear somewhere on there because it is fantastic. So just a little quick look at No Peace Without Honor and the way we finished up. It was a Bourbon minor victory, and I really enjoyed sort of the defensive challenge of playing the Dutch allies.